There are nights when the stage doesn't just shine, it watches you. Gary, Indiana, a late autumn evening when Michael Jackson was just 5 years old. I still vividly remember that night, as if the stage lights had been permanently imprinted on my retina. In the air, thick with the scent of people and the smoke of the tiny club, everything seemed to vibrate to a single heartbeat. Anticipation. I stood close to the wings, my fingers lightly touching the faded red velvet curtain. I didn't understand why I was trembling slightly then, but looking back now, perhaps it was because I knew, by some primitive instinct, that tonight would not be like any other night. The stage before me wasn't large, even somewhat worn with faintly cracked wooden floors, but the golden light washing over it made it look like a secret box about to spring open. The tightly packed round tables, the grating sound of chairs being pulled, the mingling laughter and chatter of the patrons, all created a tense chaos, as if an unseen interrogation was underway, and everyone was a suspect. I didn't say it aloud, but I wondered internally. Could a 5-year-old boy truly carry the full weight of the room's expectation? Joe appeared behind me without a sound, as if he were one with the very atmosphere. The space around Joe always possessed a strange stillness, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of someone who observes every crack, a silence that compelled me to stand straighter, even to slow my breathing. He crossed his arms, his gaze not toward me but piercing through the curtain, as if he could see every step his children would take before they even emerged. No anger, no pressure, only a suspiciously deep calm. When I glanced over, Joe caught my eye. He said nothing, but that slight nod gave me the feeling I had just received a top-secret command. Backstage, I faintly heard the name Michael being called softly among his brothers. A question flashed in my mind. Could the young boy feel the immense pressure we all were bearing tonight? I had seen Michael practice countless times, the tiny boy with eyes bright as two dark gems who could catch a rhythm even before the music began. He didn't just mimic, he understood music in a way adults rarely could. But tonight was different. Tonight was not the Jacksons' living room, not the backyard, not a practice session in front of the mirror. Tonight was a real stage. Tonight was where even the smallest mistake would be exposed before dozens, hundreds of eyes. I turned to Joe, hoping for a sign of reassurance. But Joe wasn't looking at me. He looked at the stage like a person calculating every move of an intricate plan. There was no encouragement, no threat, only a strange trust or a silent challenge. The house lights dimmed, the room plunged into a thick electric void. A drawn-out "oh" rippled through the audience like wind through a forest. I felt my hands turn cold. Joe remained exactly where he was. Then the intro music swelled, sharp, powerful, as if opening a case where the victim was yet unaware they were the target. I heard small footsteps behind me. Tiny figures moved like apprentice ghosts. But there was one figure I couldn't take my eyes off. Michael. The boy stood slightly tilted, his small shoulders trembling not from fear, but because he was holding the rhythm in his mind, like a machine born to dance yet still fighting to control every movement. When the curtain flew open, white light shone directly upon them, and in that instant, I saw clearly, Michael became motionless for a split second, as if pulled straight into the vortex of an invisible whirlpool. Then he smiled, a tiny smile that carried more seismic force than all the applause in the room. The audience began to cheer as they recognized the miniature Jackson 5. I heard delighted laughter, whispered comments, the clinking of glasses, but all of it was erased from my mind when Michael stepped to the front row. He stood right at the edge of the stage, where the light was strongest, where every minor flaw would be most visible. The boy slightly pivoted his toes, a move I recognized from hundreds of hours of practice. But tonight, that move was more than just a step. It was a signal that he had entered what I called the no-mistake zone, a zone that only those truly born for the stage could reach. I could hear my own heart more clearly than the music. Joe, meanwhile, was breathing very steadily, as if he had already foreseen every beat about to unfold. The room's atmosphere shifted from rowdy to taut, as if an inquest was imminent. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on a 5-year-old child, and I realized the entire world in that moment was converging on a single point: Michael Jackson's first dance step. I swallowed. Joe did not blink. Only a few seconds left. A few seconds before an event, which years later would still be called a legend, was about to begin. And I was standing there, right next to Joe, waiting to see what would happen when a prodigy boy took the stage for the first time, not knowing that this very night would lead to the moment he lost his rhythm mid-dance and made history. The music erupted, so powerful I felt the floor under my feet shake with every drum beat. The light cut obliquely, creating alternating patches of shadow and glare, like a blade sweeping across the room. No one spoke, but I swear I could hear every breath in the audience being held captive like an invisible net tightening around the stage. Michael stood right in the center, so small that the light seemed to threaten to swallow him. But those eyes, the eyes that always shone as if hiding a private layer of rhythm, were suddenly exceptionally still. He looked toward the audience, but not really. An almost overwhelming focus made me feel like he was confronting some sort of unseen force. Joe still stood next to me, unmoving. His eyes were locked on Michael like a detective waiting for the most critical moment in an interrogation. Michael began to dance. His movements were so smooth they drew nods of approval even from the adults standing backstage. His small feet glided across the floor, every spin, every kick, precisely timed like a calculated volley of shots. The effect was truly bizarre. A 5-year-old boy commanding the stage like a seasoned adult performer. I felt my breathing slowly steadying. It's okay, I told myself. It's okay. But in that very instant, something happened. The music shifted sections, a sharp rhythmic jolt, the kind that easily makes new performers lose their place if they aren't prepared. I had seen major artists struggle with this part, so for a 5-year-old boy, the risk was palpable. Michael spun with the beat, then stopped. 1 beat, 2 beats, not an intentional pause, not a stop required by the choreography. He froze. Center stage, under the spotlight, in the middle of a room waiting for his magic. I clearly heard my own heart pounding like an urgent knock at the door. The audience initially thought it was part of the act, but as Michael stood still for too long, the expressions of some began to change. Doubt, confusion. The first faint murmurs arose like wind rustling through torn curtains. The band behind him also paused for a second. A guitarist turned to look at the drummer. The drummer turned to the bassist. Every look seemed to ask, "What's wrong?" I wanted to rush out to prompt him, to do something, anything, but my hands just gripped the edge of the curtain. I felt like a witness watching an event so fragile that one slight touch would make everything collapse. Did the kid lose the rhythm? Why is he standing still? He must have forgotten the moves. The whispers spread, dull as unsharpened knives, but still powerful enough to scratch a line into any artist's confidence. Michael remained motionless, head slightly bowed, shoulders rigid. The light from above cast his shadow long on the floor, fragile, faintly trembling. I turned to Joe, searching for any sign of panic or anxiety, but his face was completely calm, to the point of being terrifying. Not the calm of relaxation, but the calm of someone observing a psychological duel. Joe leaned slightly toward me, his voice low and sharp like a blade skimming a glass table. This is the moment. He either breaks or becomes something else. His words sent a shudder down my spine. It felt like I was no longer standing in a small club in Indiana, but in an interrogation room where every breath of the suspect held vital meaning. The music continued. The tempo moved past Michael as if it wouldn't wait for him. If he didn't catch up immediately, he would be utterly lost, and the performance would shatter before our eyes. I wanted to yell, "Michael, the beat is moving," but my throat only managed a quick gasp. The audience began to shift, heads tilting back and forth, their puzzled eyes fixed on the small boy center stage, as if looking at an unsolvable clue. Then, without warning, Michael lifted his head. His eyes changed, no longer confusion, no longer the stiffness of a child who made a mistake, but something else. A strange, silent, yet powerful light that made me feel like the entire stage had just switched to a different mode. Joe exhaled softly. A very faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth, the smile of someone who had just heard the signal he was waiting for. Michael slightly pivoted his left toe. a spin not included in the practice routine, a completely unfamiliar move that made me think I had misseen it. And just then, the music changed beat again, like a door slightly opening with a squeaking hinge. I understood immediately. Michael was about to do something no one in this room, not even I, dared to imagine. It felt like I was watching a case about to be reversed in a split second, a moment that anyone who blinked would miss. The audience leaned forward. The band members looked at each other, waiting to see what would happen next. I clenched the edge of the curtain until my knuckles were white. The spotlight shone directly on Michael's face, and the 5-year-old boy, who had just lost his rhythm mid-dance in his first major performance, was preparing to respond with something that would demand a place in history. I don't know what made the room so silent. The music was still playing, the lights still shining, the audience still sitting before the stage, but somehow I felt everything around me slowing down, or perhaps I was slowing down just to better see the moment about to erupt. Michael raised his head amid the bright white light. The boy's eyes, no more panic, no more awkwardness. Instead, something strangely calm yet dangerous, like the look of someone who had just found an escape route no one else saw. I held my breath. The entire audience seemed to be on the edge of a secret. And then, just as the bass hit hard like a question mark, Joe leaned close to my ear. He didn't take his eyes off Michael. No, not for a second. His voice was low, steady, but underneath it was a layer as sharp and cold as metal. He's not stuck, he's listening. My body temperature seemed to plummet, listening, while being offbeat. I turned to look at Joe as if he had just spoken the secret code to a door the whole room had overlooked, but he didn't look back at me. He only looked at the tiny boy center stage, like something about to materialize from the shadows. Michael closed his eyes for exactly one beat. The 5-year-old boy stood under the lights, amid the flowing music, surrounded by eyes anticipating judgment, and he closed his eyes. I saw a drop of sweat roll down his temple, glistening under the light like shattering glass. Then he opened his eyes, and Michael's left foot, a small movement yet sharp as the cut of a thin blade, began to glide sideways. Not a move they practiced at home, not a Jackson 5 move, not a move I had ever seen a child execute. It was a slide, smooth, clean, cold, a type of movement that would make anyone who hadn't trained for months immediately stumble. I opened my mouth but couldn't utter a word. The audience gasped as if they had just witnessed a clue burst into light amidst a complex case. Michael continued. He pivoted his right toe, then his entire body, following the bass beat, as if he was creating a bridge to connect the rhythm he had missed seconds before with the current beat. And another spin, light, precise, no trembling whatsoever. The collective breath of the room almost merged into one current. The drummer was the first to snap out of it. He burst into laughter, then immediately caught the rhythm, matching the move Michael had just created. The bass and guitar instantly followed suit as if they had been waiting for this signal all along. The audience erupted, tables rattled from the applause. One person jumped to their feet shouting, "Wow, that kid!" No one knew, no one thought, no one even imagined that the moment Michael stood frozen would become the pivot point for the entire performance. But I stood closest to see the other thing. Not talent, not technique, not the cuteness of a child, but the survival instinct of an artist. An instinct that said, when everything is shattering in your hands, create something new from the wreckage. I looked at Joe. He wasn't applauding, not cheering, not showing amazement. He just stood still, one arm crossed over his chest, the other gently touching his mustache, his eyes following Michael's every step like someone recording every piece of evidence. Then he spoke, very softly, but loud enough for me to hear. I knew he would do it. I turned back to the stage. Michael was now completely one with the music, dancing as if he had never paused, as if the moment of losing the rhythm was just a planned silence to create the life-saving turn. But I knew it wasn't planned. I clearly saw the fleeting confusion in his eyes when he missed the beat, the hesitation, small as a blink, the invisible fear, thin as a breath. No one could fake that fear. A child doesn't know how to conceal completely. And precisely because of that, the improvised spin that followed was like a tear in the script, a place where authenticity surged so powerfully that it made the entire room hold its breath. The audience continued to cheer. The band hammered the rhythm harder, as if they were playing for a seasoned artist, not a child not yet old enough for school. Michael rotated his shoulder, glided his foot, tilted his head, and finished with a small circular spin, just enough to seamlessly integrate the improvisation into the next choreography segment. Everything was so fluid that anyone who hadn't been watching from the start wouldn't know he had lost the rhythm midway. I let out a long breath, feeling like I had just survived a high-stakes chase where any mistake would send the whole team plummeting into the abyss. Then Joe said to me, this time clearer, almost a declaration, "That step, no one taught him that." I looked up at him. His face was no longer calm. There was something else, a confirmation of what, years later, people would call the backstage legend. A truth Joe had seen from the very first second. A truth that I had only just caught up with. The step that just saved the entire performance was the step Michael invented in the exact moment of crisis. And I understood. That moment had changed everything. When the music ended, the atmosphere in the room exploded like a massive, long, compressed blast. The applause was thunderous. Shouts echoed from multiple directions. The audience was no longer seated. They stood up as if they had just witnessed something beyond the scope of a typical performance. I wanted to relax, to smile, to join the excitement sweeping across the room, but my body remained tense as a wire, waiting to be plucked. Joe was different. He stood still like a statue misplaced. The stage lights swept across his face, creating patches of light and shadow like a crime scene photo being scanned with a flashlight. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared straight into the empty space where Michael had performed, as if he could still see the afterglow of the boy's movements hovering in the air. Michael ran backstage, breathing heavily, but his eyes still shining brilliantly. The boy smiled at his brothers, a smile full of the relief of someone who had narrowly escaped danger, though no one else knew the severity of that slip-up. I instinctively stepped forward, intending to praise him, to say something meaningful, an acknowledgement, an encouragement. But just as I drew near, Joe stepped in front, not hastily, not urgently. He simply walked up like someone with absolute control. Michael looked up at him. All the excitement on the boy's face seemed to freeze. Joe bent down, placing his hand on Michael's shoulder, so gently I wasn't sure if it was a gesture of comfort or an assessment of something deeper. Then he spoke in a low, steady voice, a kind of sound with the gravitas to deeply etch itself into the listener's mind. "You felt it, didn't you?" Michael's eyes widened. He didn't answer immediately. The question carried no hint of reproach, not praise. It was like a validation. He nodded slowly. I stood in the corner, feeling like a witness to a soft yet incisive interrogation. Joe held his gaze on Michael's face for a few more seconds, before continuing, this time lower, as if he didn't want anyone but me to hear. "That step was yours, not mine, not theirs, yours." My heart lurched. Joe rarely spoke so directly. He never praised easily. And these words weren't impulsive praise. It was like an accurate report after analyzing every detail of the incident. Michael bit his lip. He said nothing, but his eyes, oh God, those eyes trembled slightly, as if he, too, didn't fully comprehend what he had just done. It was a truth even greater than the legend. Even Michael didn't know how he pulled himself out of that missed beat.
I looked at Joe. He crossed his arms, his gaze no longer on the boy, but shifted to the empty space behind the wings. A deep, dark space like a tunnel leading into his mind. And then he said the words I would never forget. "Do you know what makes a performer?" He didn't look at anyone specific when he asked that question. "It's not perfection. It's the moment you fall, and nobody sees the fall because you rise too fast." The air around me felt like a vacuum had been carved out. Joe didn't praise the improvised step, didn't analyze the technique, didn't say Michael was good, didn't say he was excellent. He spoke about the instinct that surged in the very second of crisis. And I understood. That was why he was so calm when Michael froze center stage. He had seen something that I and the whole room had missed. But the thing that truly chilled me happened a few minutes later. When Michael ran back to hug his brothers, giggling, thinking everything was over, Joe called my name, softly, almost a hint. I walked over. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were still fixed on the empty stage. People will talk about that step. He spoke slowly. Not because he planned it, but because nobody will believe a 5-year-old could pull himself back like that. I swallowed hard. His words landed precisely where I hadn't dared to think. He inhaled lightly, then tilted his head toward the audience, where patrons were still buzzing as if trying to decipher what they had just witnessed. They'll call it luck. A slight pause. But we know it wasn't. He turned to look at me. His eyes were deep like the cut of a confession, or a warning. I wasn't sure. That boy just created something that cannot be taught. I felt like I was standing on the border between fact and legend. A border thin as a hair, yet capable of altering a person's entire life. Michael ran up to us, his breath still fluttering with excitement. He smiled brightly. Did I do okay? In that moment, I thought Joe would embrace him, or pat his head, or say an encouraging word like other fathers. But he just placed both hands on Michael's shoulders, bent down, and said a sentence that made me shudder even more than everything before. You didn't do okay. Pause. You did something else. I looked into Michael's eyes. The smile on the boy's face faded for half a second, as if his small heart had brushed against something too big for him to grasp. Then his eyes brightened again, not the innocent light of a child, but the light of someone who just learned he possessed something others did not. And I understood. That very moment, in this tiny backstage area, history began to take its first shape. There are moments, even if they last only for a few dozen seconds, that can create repercussions that persist for decades. I realized this as the final applause gradually faded and the stage lights were dimmed, leaving a faint yellow hue like the light in an interrogation room. The atmosphere backstage changed in a strange way. Not rowdy, not relieved, but a sudden hush, the kind of silence that only appears when something greater than the event itself is forming. Michael was still excited, his eyes shining like two small lamps. He ran around his brothers, repeating the improvised move until he nearly fell because his legs were tired. The older brothers laughed, patted his shoulder, called him cool, but I clearly saw that they didn't truly understand what had just happened on stage. They saw a great move, a split-second rescue. But I and Joe, we knew it was a sign. Not a sign of perfection, but of the artist's instinct flaring up in a moment of extreme peril. An instinct that cannot be taught, cannot be practiced, cannot be forced. It can only emerge. I followed Joe into the small room behind the stage, where there were only a few chairs, walls with peeling paint, and a slightly cracked mirror in the corner. The room was both small and dim. The yellow light made it look more like a room for questioning than a break area. If anyone walked in without knowing what had happened, they might think a tense interrogation had just taken place here. Joe sat down on a chair, slightly tilting his head back like someone piecing together the clues of an incident that only he had fully observed. I leaned against the wall, watching his shadow lengthen on the tile floor. Something about Joe reminded me of the dim light of a street lamp, soft, yet unable to conceal the sharp edges within.
Michael burst in like a stream of light too intense for the small room. He jumped onto the chair opposite Joe, swinging his feet. "Dad, did you see? I did it." His voice was high-pitched, full of pride. Joe just looked at him for a few seconds, saying nothing. Then he asked only one question, his voice low and slow as if weighing every word. "Do you know why you were able to do it?" I looked at Michael. The boy furrowed his brow, shaking his head. Joe sighed, a long breath but not heavy, more like he was closing an old file to open a newer, more mysterious one. "Because you listen to the music," he said, then paused. "In a way no one else does." Michael was silent. I was silent too. The empty room seemed to hold its breath with us. A long silence passed before Michael asked softly, "Did I do something wrong?" If my heart could have heard its own clear sound, it would have been a crack splitting into two beats. A 5-year-old boy, who had just created a moment the room considered extraordinary, was afraid he had done something wrong. Joe placed his hands on his knees, leaning forward, not violently, not aggressively, but gently, like someone in an interrogation room about to state the most important truth. "No," he said slowly, clearly, sharply. "You did right, in a way no one taught you." Michael still didn't fully comprehend, but I did. And that sent a strange chill down my spine, as if I was standing before the first witness of a legend forming right before my eyes. After that, Joe stood up, walking toward the door. He paused, placing his hand on the wooden frame. Without turning back, he said to me, "There are things that happen on stage that only occur once in a lifetime." I swallowed, did not reply. Tonight, I saw that in him. His voice was not that of a proud father, nor was it the voice of a calculating manager. It was the voice of someone who had just recognized a truth so monumental that he couldn't immediately articulate it himself. I was grateful he wasn't looking at me then, because if he had turned around, he would have seen my face was more stunned than Michael's. When Joe walked out, leaving me and the boy in the room, Michael tilted his head and looked at me. "Did I really do it, Uncle?" I took a deep breath. Finding the right answer wasn't easy, but I couldn't lie. Not to this boy, not after what I had just witnessed. I knelt down to his level, speaking very slowly. "You didn't just do it. You turned a mistake into something people will talk about for a very long time." Michael's eyes widened. "Why?" I looked into his eyes, child's eyes, yet containing something far beyond his age. "Because you didn't run away," I said. "You stood still and listened." He was silent, then nodded as if he was memorizing every word to store in the deepest part of his mind. Before we walked out of the room, I took a final look at the cracked mirror in the corner. In it, Michael's reflection stood next to mine, small, skinny, sweat still on his forehead, but his gaze was anything but small. That gaze was opening the future, a future that tonight, the missed beat, the improvised spin, and Joe's words had set in motion in a way no one could have anticipated. As we stepped back onto the empty stage, I heard the very distant echo of lingering applause in the air, and in that moment I understood. A legend is not born from success, but born from the moment of failure that threatened to swallow everything whole, yet was turned into history by a 5-year-old boy.